So right where we left off, and all you'll see that I've added is a little bit of fairway surrounds so that I know roughly where that's going to be, and a bunker. No sculpting changes or anything. And you'll see that I've unfilled the fairway. That's purely because I find the contours a little bit easier to read when they're like this. We'll still say the same. We've done that plot trick where the fairway texture doesn't auto flatten. So what we see is what we get. Now today we're going to look at how you might go about sculpting this green, what features you might want to bring in, and basically how do you make a flat green interesting. The first rule is going to be the same as we've always done. What does your land want to do? Because rather than coming in with a preconceived idea of this green must do this, if you go with what the land has given you and you've made the plot in an interesting way, well, you're going to get different greens every time, and you're going to get different features than you might otherwise play off. I likely wouldn't have come up with an approach had I not seen that little bit there. This green probably wouldn't look quite like this. So first of all, what have we got? And I might outline those key features. So we've got that little mound coming in, and that fits with this. Do we want to extend that? Remember, our mound was our key feature, but remember we also said we wanted you to land here. So if I extend that mound further, that's kind of taking away half of this landing zone and probably reducing it, so I reckon I'll flatten that out a bit. But it's worth considering what's always there, and I'll basically go around tracing the red slopes. We've got a little bit of a tier, well, a slope here even. Now that one I do quite like, because it's going to mean that you want to be even more precise when approaching this green. Let's say the flag's here, well, I've got to end up left of this, which means I have to be shooting that tiny little gap there. So that one I will keep. You recall in the last episode we created a bit of a backstop. We'll smooth that out, but I like that. It means that this pin down here is generally going to be really accessible. So what can we do to defend that? We've got a bunker right if you're long right. I think the other thing is going to be having a little bit of a runoff here. And a good rule of thumb, it won't work for every pin, it won't work in every situation. Par 5s and short 3s are different. For every helping slope you have, or for every slope that takes the ball away, have one that can shuffle it closer. So here, well, we've got, if you're missing right, bad, short, bad, but if you're missing left and long, that's going to bring the ball back to, say, a pin here. To a pin here, well, this one's our main hindering slope. Can we give anything that's going to make that less difficult? I'm not sure that we can, but I guess if you're missing over here, it's going to trickle on this way. That will work. Then again, this is going to be a par 5, so I'm not so worried if I don't have a big backstop for this one. And that's not saying you must provide a backstop on every pin. It's just generally, if you've got a pin where the only way to get at it is one specific direction and everywhere else is death, you're going to want to reconsider that. Now, general slopes, like what are your big slopes? We've got a runoff here. The green generally is flowing this way, which I like. That works with the approach that we'd put and it makes sense. And again this way. We then got a little bit of a spine coming in here and an interesting mound and a sort of tier there. But I like that you've got two little internal mounds. So now that we've had a little look around the green and tried to understand it a bit more, you want to work out which slopes do you want to flatten, which slopes do you want to keep. And there's a couple of, and which slopes do you want to exacerbate even more. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is, I don't like this big runoff here, so I'm going to raise that, and there's ways of flattening this that are going to still keep the interest. This brush here, well, the very middle, the epicenter is going to come up as much as we pull it up, and it's quite good for creating mounds. Whereas on the outside you can see this bit barely being touched. Well, we can use that really effectively to flatten out some of these slopes, and it's going to fit with this bunker that we've built in here. So if I'm going to place it so that it's basically covering all of that red slope but on the edge, and we're just going to raise gradually. So what you're thinking here is it's raising this bit more than it's raising this bit, which, well, we had currently this bit's higher than here, so it's just going to even out that slope. If we look back at it, it's kind of done that. We can do the same again. And there we go. Suddenly we've gained some pinnable area, but what's interesting about this is it's still left a little bit of a runoff here. So do we maybe want to make this a little mini tier? Because that That could be interesting. So if we're doing that, I might just go to raise again. I typically on greens will stick to raise until something's just not going to work. Now I don't like that. That's not left me enough place here to maybe put a pinnable area. So I like this slope, but I maybe want this slope to happen here. So we're going to undo. And what we're going to do is we're just going to raise the same height, maybe a little less, and we're going to do it a little further away. And then at the bottom, underneath it, we're just going to lower here. And that should, you can see we're trying to just push this slope into the middle. Not the easiest thing in the world, but you can achieve it. And now I think that's an area where we can have a pin. There's a slope that hurts, there's a slope that's going to help and work the ball towards it, and there's potential for a runoff long if you miss and you're a bit too exuberant. I think we'll make that now. So again, using that same tool, we're just going to lower down here. And that's... I don't love this little bit of red here, so we're going to get rid of that as well. And there we go. I think we've got a pin that with is maybe one flatten away, and we'll come to that. And I'm still not really thinking about dividing the green too much into 4 spots, because I like to try to leave actually coming up with these pins at the end, until the end if I can. Now this one I'm actually going to go to flatten. It's kind of hard to explain why, but I think this slope needs to come down a bit harder, and I still want to leave this bit here, so I want that mound to be prominent. I'm doing this just a touch, kind of maintaining that slope, but also maintaining and actually bringing that mound more into play. Because we've brought this down, that's actually made this mound look higher than it was. Now, what else can we do? I still want to make it so that there is this little alleyway here, for lack of a better term. That's like our entrance to this portion of the green. So we need to make it so that that's doable. I think here I'm going to go for flatten, because I know the area I want to be relatively flat, and we're just going to push that slope downhill a little bit. So now the question has to be, well, what's that done to the rest of the green, just by doing a couple of flattens? It's made this slope pretty severe, and I think generally this whole portion of the green's probably going to need to come up just a touch. And I did want that false front at the front. Well, we can kind of just sculpt around it with flatten, and that should keep it. So if you think about what flatten does, it's basically making this point and this point closer together. Well, by doing that, it's raising this, lowering this. That's going to make this slope steeper and this slope steeper, which is kind of what we want. So if you want to flatten a flatter portion of the green, like, go for it. It can be a nice quick way of getting consistent slopes, which also will break better generally. You can lower with flatten as well. If I feel that this part of the slope is too steep, lowering with flatten is generally going to soften it out a bit. As you can see, we've now got a portion of the green that I think we can use, and works pretty well. So at the moment we've looked at a couple of slopes and just working off what we had. I think the final one is, what sort of internal contours do you have that can add interest once you're on the green? And sometimes they can influence your strategy from way back. So like this backstop, for example, it's not a tier, it's just a contour, it's a slope. So think about something like this. If you go slightly long and you're putting down to this pin, well, suddenly distance control becomes really tricky. And let's say we put a pin here, or maybe you're suddenly worrying about running off the green. So it can be a little bit of a double-edged sword if you use them cleverly, and if you don't make them too severe. If it's like 4 feet high, there's no chance of staying on the green with that putt. If it's 5 inches, it doesn't matter. You've got to try to get it about right. A foot generally works quite nicely. So what other contours could we put in? I think honestly it's often working around what you've got, but let's see what slopes we have. And in all honesty, I'm not seeing a huge amount that I might want to change at this point. I quite like that the tier that we've got is natural, but also it has some interest within it. There's a little slope here. There's this one at the back. Now I'm seeing this though. I'm wondering if we can use that a little bit more. So I think if I raise this up, then that gives a way of shunting balls that are a bit too far left down to here, which fits the general premise of this green. It'll also, hopefully, mean that anything that's just struck on the right angle towards this pin, but is a little bit too bold, well, you've got a nice backstop that can bring you back and use it. So you can gamble and play long if you want. So something like that, a little mound, can work really nicely. And as ever, when you're doing something like that, a mound on the edge of the green, make it obvious from off the edge of the green as well. Let's spend some time on that contour so that from 200 yards away, a player knows what they're going to get. They know how the ball is going to react. It's logical and it makes sense. Because if we zoom out now, well, you can see from here, there's a little bit of a backstop there. You can probably make even more of it if we wanted to. I think I might. Because I want to encourage people, if they are trying to draw the ball in, we can soften the contour out itself. But if they're trying to attack the back left of the green, you want to reward them, because that's the most difficult shot. The easiest shot would be to attack the back right, and we want that to be a runoff. So, I guess the final thing is, what kind of contours could you use? Well, within here we've got a few, and I'm just going to highlight them and talk about what they can be used for. You've got a bit of a tier here, or rather let's call this one a shelf. It's on the side of the green. It's just, I guess, like, I don't know whether there's a technical definition. I think of a shelf as more like one side of the green rather than a tier as like lengthways. But it's functioning kind of the same, but it's not so much a question of have you got the right club as can you hit to the right side of the green. So more a test of accuracy rather than distance control. We then got this, which could function as a spine. So a spine would be like a raise in the green that you either roll up and over. And let's just make that happen a bit, because I think it's kind of showing tendencies to doing this already. So we're just going to lower the other side. And it's come out of this bunker, but if you're over this, a spine is really kind of helping with your distance control a little bit more. It can be a real saviour for this pin. Going up there and coming back will give you a very easy birdie or eagle putt. Going slightly over, that's trickier. And if you're trying to get to this pin, if you're going dead at it, that's going to be really tough for distance control. Could leave you down here and leave an interesting putt as to how you want to get around it. But it's also going to make you think, well, that's a difficult shot. Maybe I'll try to ride this slope all the way. So spine can be interesting. You can put it all the way across the green. I tend to prefer doing it just in part. And like with tiers, with all of these, I prefer to make it so that there's parts of the tier or spine that are more severe than others. That will generally mean that there's a better place to miss. So as you can see, if we flatten that out a little bit, how this green develops a bit more. Not sure I like those changes, but you never know. We're going to undo those. The final one that I haven't touched on is mounds. You can, and I see this used really badly by a few, not a few, but quite a lot of what people would do to make pins tricky in the old game would be just to go one side and raise it so it's on a hill. Or worse still would be to go dead under the pin and raise it. And it's like, great, it breaks away in every single direction. But that said, a little mound put somewhere where it's interesting and makes sense. Let's say we'll raise this bit up because it's kind of showing bits of that already. On a short par 4 or a par 5, that sort of a green feature can make putting to this pin, which I'll probably move to about here, really interesting. Because if you're slightly off target, let's say you're putting from here, well, your direct line is now really interesting. Let's say if you're here, look at how that putt changes. Changes, could be a backstop. There's ways in which that can be really interesting as well. So, and let's keep that one for the moment. That adds something. Yeah, I definitely think that adds something to the screen. That works quite nicely. So that's going to wrap it up for this tutorial, and I hope that helps you see how you might develop a green, as well as gives you some ideas of some contours you could use, their pros and their cons. See you next time.